There are moments in life where you don't just fall apart, you dissolve. Everything you trusted collapses, everything you built crumbles, and the identity you wore for years no longer fits your skin. And in that darkness, it feels as if the universe has betrayed you. But the truth is far more profound. The universe was never breaking you to punish you. It was breaking you to free you. Every wound that split you open was a doorway. Every ending that shattered you was a threshold. You were being pulled out of an old life that you had outgrown, even if you weren't ready to admit it. The universe takes away only what you cling to when it no longer aligns with who you're becoming. And yes, it hurts, not because you're weak, but because you're attached to the version of yourself that cannot continue with you into your next chapter. Awakening never begins with clarity, it begins with disruption. It begins with the moment you can no longer numb the truth inside you. It begins when the noise of the world becomes unbearable, and the silence inside you becomes louder than your excuses. And in that silence you meet yourself, not the polished, socially acceptable self you've been performing, but the raw, unfiltered truth of who you are. When you're broken open, the universe exposes the illusions you have been living in, the relationships you tolerated, the patterns you repeated, the dreams you abandoned, the truths you buried. All of it rises to the surface, not to shame you, but to awaken you. What's breaking inside you is only what was false, fragile, or borrowed. What remains is what was always yours. The storm in your life is not chaos, it is recalibration. It is life rearranging itself to match the frequency of the person you were always meant to become. You are not being punished, you are being initiated. Not into suffering, but into sovereignty. Into the kind of inner freedom that only arrives when everything external falls away. And when the breaking is done, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see with new eyes. You feel with a deeper heart. You stand with a strength you didn't know was possible. You lose interest in the battles that once consumed you. You stop trying to force what isn't for you. You begin to trust the hidden order beneath the chaos. Awakening isn't a moment of enlightenment. It is a remembering, a returning, a reclaiming. You aren't becoming someone new. You are finally meeting who you were always meant to be. So if life has broken you, understand this: you are standing at the threshold of your transformation. Your pain is not your ending. It is the beginning of your awakening. Breakdowns are spiritual catalysts because they interrupt the version of life you've been unconsciously maintaining. They force you out of patterns you would never willingly abandon, and they expose the parts of you that have been operating on survival instead of truth. When everything collapses, you are no longer able to rely on the familiar identities you've used to navigate the world, and in that moment of raw vulnerability, the deeper layers of your psyche begin to speak. A breakdown strips away the distractions, the performances, the roles you've played for others, and reveals what has been silently asking for your attention. You don't break because you are weak. You break because you've reached the point where your soul can no longer tolerate the weight of what's inauthentic. The life you built from fear, obligation, or denial eventually becomes too small to contain the person you're meant to become. In every breakdown there is a moment where you feel lost, suspended between who you were and who you're becoming. This is the initiation. It is the collapse of the ego's certainty, the dismantling of the narratives you've repeated for years, and the undoing of the false stability you clung to. The breakdown forces you into the unknown, a place your mind resists because it has no map for what comes next. Yet this very uncertainty becomes the ground upon which a new awareness begins to form. It is in the confusion, the exhaustion, and the emotional unraveling that you encounter truths you once pushed away. You see the relationships that drained you, the dreams you postponed, the fears that dictated your decisions, and the wounds you kept hidden even from yourself. There is a sacred intelligence in the breaking. What feels like chaos is often the rearrangement of your inner world. Old stories rise to the surface not to torment you, but to be released. Emotions you buried return with intensity because they are demanding recognition. The breakdown makes you sit with yourself in a way you never have, and in that stillness, fragments of your forgotten self begin to reconnect. The pain becomes a teacher, the confusion a compass, and the vulnerability a gateway. Without breakdowns, you would stay comfortably asleep in a life that limits you. It is the collapse that wakes you. It is the unraveling that reveals who you truly are beneath conditioning and fear. And though it feels like everything is falling apart, something far deeper is quietly falling into place. Pain exposes buried truths because it removes the filters you've used to keep yourself comfortable. It disrupts the stories you've constructed to avoid facing what lies beneath the surface. When life is smooth, it's easy to overlook the unresolved emotions, the unspoken disappointments, and the silent wounds you carry. But the moment pain arrives, especially the kind that cracks you open, the unconscious rises with force, demanding to be acknowledged. Pain becomes the spotlight that illuminates what you've numbed, denied, or dismissed. It reveals the parts of you that have been whispering for years, but were never given permission to speak. You don't just feel pain. You become aware of what caused it, what you've been avoiding, and what has needed healing long before the breaking point. The truths exposed by pain are often the ones you are least prepared to face. It shows you who you've been pretending to be, the relationships that have outlived their purpose, and the emotional patterns you've been repeating without realizing their origins. Pain highlights the difference between what you say you want and what you continue to tolerate. It uncovers the expectations you place on yourself, the childhood wounds you never addressed, and the fears you carry that influence your every decision. In the midst of discomfort, clarity becomes unavoidable. The illusions you once found comfort in lose their power, and the reality of your inner world becomes impossible to ignore. Sometimes the truth that pain reveals is simply that you've outgrown the life you're still trying to fit into. The dissatisfaction you've been rationalizing finally surfaces as a call for change. Pain forces you to confront the emotional residue left behind from old betrayals, lost opportunities, or versions of yourself you've abandoned. It pulls memories from the shadows, not to punish you, but to show you what still needs understanding, forgiveness, or liberation. In this way, pain becomes a mirror, unforgiving but honest. It reflects the hidden architecture of your inner life, showing you the cracks that require attention before they collapse under their own weight. The truths uncovered through pain are rarely gentle, but they are always transformative. They guide you toward a deeper awareness of your needs, your boundaries, and your worth. They push you out of denial and into alignment. The moment pain exposes what's been buried, you gain the opportunity to rewrite your story, reclaim your power, and rebuild a life that reflects your authentic self rather than your fears. Awakening begins in silence because silence is the only space where the noise of the world can no longer drown out the voice within you. As long as you are surrounded by distraction, obligations, and the constant pull of external expectations, you move through life on autopilot, doing, reacting, performing. But when life quiets you, whether through loss, stillness, or emotional exhaustion, you begin to hear what has been waiting beneath the surface. Silence strips away the outer layers you've used to define yourself and leaves you face to face with your inner truth. In that stillness, the thoughts you've avoided, the emotions you've suppressed, and the desires you've neglected rise with surprising clarity. The quiet becomes a doorway into the parts of you that you've forgotten exist. In silence, the mind slows enough to reveal the patterns that have shaped your life. You begin to notice the fears that dictate your choices, the old wounds that color your reactions, and the beliefs you inherited without questioning. You start to see how much of your identity has been built from survival rather than authenticity. The silence doesn't ask you to be calm, it asks you to be honest. And that honesty can feel unsettling because it exposes the gap between who you are and who you've been pretending to be. But it is in that discomfort that awakening begins. It is the moment you stop seeking answers outside yourself and start listening to the quiet wisdom you carry within. Silence becomes a sanctuary where your intuition finally has room to speak. When external noise fades, your inner guidance grows louder. You begin to sense what drains you and what nourishes you. You distinguish between the life you were taught to want and the life that actually calls to you. In the stillness, intuition becomes less of a whisper and more of a pull, gentle but undeniable. It nudges you toward choices that align with your truth, even when those choices feel unfamiliar or frightening. Silence teaches you that awakening is not an event but a remembering, a slow return to the self you abandoned, while trying to meet expectations that were never yours. In the quiet, you rediscover your strength, not the loud kind that is proven through action, but the steady kind that comes from knowing who you are. You begin to trust yourself in ways you never have, and that trust becomes the foundation on which your transformation unfolds, quietly, steadily, and deeply, in the sacred space where awakening is born. You are not being punished, but initiated, because life's most challenging moments are often disguised thresholds. When everything around you seems to be falling apart, it's easy to assume you've done something wrong, that the universe is withholding something from you, or that you are being pushed into suffering without purpose. But the deeper truth is far more transformative. The breaking, the loss, the confusion, and the discomfort are not signs of punishment, they are signs of preparation. You are being stripped of what no longer aligns with who you are becoming, and that process feels like being torn apart only because you were still attached to a version of yourself that cannot continue forward. Initiation is never gentle because it must separate you from the illusions you've built your life upon. It must confront you with the patterns you've repeated for years and the emotional wounds you've left unresolved. It must reveal the truth you've avoided, because the truth is what frees you. In an initiation, you are forced to sit with your shadows, your insecurities, and your fears, not to crumble under them, but to understand them. These moments are the fire that burns away everything inauthentic. They refine you. They wake you. They demand that you grow beyond the limitations you once accepted as normal. What feels like loss is often the clearing of space. What feels like rejection is often redirection. What feels like an ending is often the first step of becoming someone you've long forgotten you could be. Initiation pulls you inward. It makes you question not just what you want, but who you are. It challenges your attachments, your beliefs, and your identity so completely that you can no longer rely on the frameworks that once gave you stability. This collapse is not cruelty, it is creation. Life is not trying to break you, it is trying to rebuild you with awareness, strength, and authenticity. Your resilience is being activated, your intuition is being sharpened. Your capacity for deeper love, deeper clarity, and deeper alignment is being awakened by circumstances that demand an evolution. Every spiritual initiation begins with disorientation, because you are leaving an old chapter without yet seeing the next. You are standing between worlds, the familiar one dissolving behind you, and the true one quietly forming ahead. This in-between space is uncomfortable, but it is sacred. It is where the shift happens, where the new self begins to take shape. And when you emerge, you realize you were never punished. You were being prepared for a life that reflects your true self, not your old wounds. Transformation requires letting go because growth cannot happen in a space that is already filled with what no longer serves you. We often hold on to people, habits, identities, and stories long after they have expired, believing that letting go means losing something essential. But in reality, what you cling to is usually the very thing that keeps you from becoming who you are meant to be. Letting go is not abandonment, it is liberation. It is the conscious release of what has become too small for your spirit. Transformation demands space. Space for new awareness, new choices, and new versions of yourself to emerge. Without releasing the old, there is no room for the new to take root. Letting go feels difficult because it challenges your need for familiarity. Even painful patterns can feel safer than the uncertainty of change. You become attached to identities built from survival, relationships built on fear or obligation, and dreams shaped by who you used to be. Transformation asks you to outgrow your comfort zone and step into the unknown. It asks you to shed layers of yourself that were never truly yours, to reclaim parts you abandoned, and to honor the truth that change often arrives disguised as loss. When you cling to what's gone, you suffer. When you release it, you evolve. The universe removes what cannot follow you into the next chapter, and letting go is the act of cooperating with that process instead of resisting it. Letting go also means surrendering control. Transformation cannot happen when you try to script every outcome or force life to fit your expectations. True growth arises when you stop gripping tightly to what must stay the same and allow life to flow in the direction it is naturally moving. The more you resist, the heavier everything becomes. But the moment you loosen your grip, you begin to feel lighter, clearer, and more aligned with your inner truth. Letting go does not erase your past, it integrates it. It allows you to take the lessons without carrying the weight. Every transformation begins with a release of old stories, of false identities, of relationships that no longer resonate, of emotions you've suppressed for years. When you let go, you return to yourself. You realize that nothing you lose was ever meant to define you. The real transformation happens in the empty space that letting go creates, where clarity emerges, healing deepens, and a truer version of you finally has room to breathe. On the other side of breaking is clarity and strength, because every collapse strips away the illusions you once depended on. When you are in the midst of breaking, everything feels chaotic, uncertain, and overwhelming. Your identity fractures, your beliefs are challenged, your emotional landscape becomes raw and unfamiliar. Yet beneath the turbulence, something is quietly happening that you cannot see at first. Your inner world is reorganizing itself. The structures that fall apart are the ones built on fear, denial, or conditioning. What survives the breaking is only what is real, and it is from that raw truth that clarity begins to emerge. You start to see life, yourself, and others without the filters you once relied on to feel safe. The confusion gives way to insight, and the heaviness begins to lift as you recognize what was holding you back all along. Clarity arrives slowly, often in moments of stillness after the storm. You begin to understand why certain relationships ended, why certain paths closed, and why life pushed you into places you didn't want to go. The pieces of your life start to make sense in ways they never did before. Cannot be taught, only lived. The strength that emerges isn't loud or performative. It's steady, grounded, and deeply rooted in self-awareness. You no longer move through life seeking external validation or fearing the judgment of others, because you've already met the darkest parts of yourself and survived. You learn to stand differently, more firmly, more authentically, and more aligned with your truth. On the other side of breaking, you become someone you never imagined you could be. Not because you changed into someone else, but because the breaking revealed the strength, wisdom, and clarity that were always waiting beneath the surface, hidden beneath the life you outgrew. In the end, every fracture in your life was guiding you toward a deeper wholeness. Every breaking point was carving out space for a stronger, wiser, more awakened version of you to emerge. Nothing you lost was meant to diminish you, it was meant to reveal you. And now, standing on the other side of everything you thought would destroy you, you carry a clarity that cannot be shaken and a strength that cannot be taken. You are no longer the person who walked into the storm, you are the one who walked out transformed. So step forward with quiet confidence. Trust the path that brought you here. Your breaking was not the end of your story, it was the moment your true story finally began.